I was told to leave if I was so good. I chose revenge and took my $450 million patent, watching him fall. It was a Monday morning just after 9 o'clock, the kind of sterile, sun-bleached morning that promised nothing but a week of the same. The long obsidian table reflected the grim faces of the 10 men seated around it, their dark suits, a uniform of corporate loyalty. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of the building's climate control system, a mechanical heartbeat for a body without a soul. At the head of the table, Blake Riss, our CEO, stood before a massive screen, his silhouette sharp against the blinding white of a title slide. He was a man built from buzzwords and venture capital. His smile was a carefully calibrated instrument used to disarm investors and intimidate employees. Today, he was announcing what he called a comprehensive product innovation, a plan to pivot the entire company's trajectory. His voice, smooth and confident, filled the room with hollow promises of market disruption and unprecedented growth. "We're not just moving forward," he declared, his hands gesturing expansively. "We are leaping into the next generation of energy solutions." I listened, my pen still, my notepad blank. I had seen the preliminary data. I knew what this leap was built on. A new slide clicked onto the screen, showcasing a sleek, minimalist schematic of a new energy cell. It was beautiful, efficient, and revolutionary. It was also a near-perfect replica of a competitor's patented core design. My job wasn't just to create. It was to ensure our creations didn't land us in a federal court. I waited for a pause, a small opening in his monologue. When it came, my voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the placid atmosphere. "Blake, a word on the legal risk here." He stopped. The momentum of his pitch halted. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. Blake's smile tightened, the friendly CEO mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "Go on, Clara. The core architecture of that cell," I said, keeping my tone even and factual, "mirrors the platform used by Kennert. Their patent filings are extensive. If we build our entire new product line on this foundation, our liability exposure would be catastrophic. We would be defending infringement claims before we even shipped the first unit." Silence. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. The hum of the air conditioning suddenly seemed deafening. Blake's face was a placid lake, but I could see the storm gathering beneath the surface. He let the silence stretch, forcing the other executives to choose a side. They stared at their hands, at the table, anywhere but at me. He finally broke the tension with a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound stripped of all humor. "Clara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you think you understand the law better than I do? Better than our $2,000 an hour legal team who has already reviewed this?" He was lying. I was the one who interfaced with that legal team. They hadn't seen this version of the schematic. I had been deliberately kept out of the loop. "I understand patent law, Blake," I replied, my voice unwavering, "and I understand the risk of building a $400 million product launch on a stolen blueprint." That was when the mask came off completely. His eyes turned to steel. He took a step toward me, his presence dominating the space. He wasn't speaking to me anymore. He was performing for his audience, the 10 silent men who nodded when he told them to nod. "Let me make something clear," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Your job is to facilitate innovation, not to obstruct it with paranoid fantasies. Argon Dynamics did not get to where it is by being timid." He scanned the faces of the other men, who now looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. I was the problem, the speed bump on the road to their bonuses. He turned his gaze back to me, and the final crushing blow came. "If you think you're so indispensable, if you think you know so much better than everyone in this room," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "If you think you don't need us, then leave. Go on, walk out that door and do it yourself." The challenge hung in the air, sharp and glittering and cruel. It was a public execution. He was daring me to call his bluff, knowing that a woman in my position, with my salary and my responsibilities, wouldn't throw it all away. He expected me to stammer, to apologize, to retreat into humiliated silence. But I wasn't looking at him. My eyes were fixed on the screen behind him. He had moved to the next slide. The title read, "Project Aurora, Intellectual Property Roadmap." And beneath it, a simple, devastating line of text, "Patent filed under Argon IP Division." Then, in a smaller font, like an afterthought, almost an insult, author, Clara Wade, Project Aurora, my project, the culmination of 6 years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of my creative and scientific energy. My name was there, yes, but it was nothing more than a credit, a footnote. The ownership, the control, the very soul of my work was being claimed by the company, by him. They weren't just stealing a competitor's design, they were stealing mine first. It all became clear in that instant. This meeting wasn't about innovation, it was about consolidating his power and formally erasing me from my own legacy. A strange calm washed over me. The sting of humiliation faded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The 10 years of loyalty I had given this company, the belief that my work mattered, the trust I had placed in men like Blake. It had all evaporated. He had just handed me the exact weapon I needed. He had given me permission to leave. My gaze shifted from the screen to his arrogant, expectant face. My voice, when I spoke, was as chilled as the air in the room. Your words are noted, Blake. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet finality of my tone was more effective than any shout. I methodically began to close my laptop. The soft click of the magnetic latch was the only sound in the dead silent room. It sounded like a key turning in a lock. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished concrete floor, and stood up. Every eye was on me. They expected me to gather my things and flee. Blake's smirk was one of triumph. I will leave, I said, my voice steady and clear, addressing not just Blake but the entire room. But I'll be taking what belongs to me. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Blake's face. He hadn't expected this. He had expected submission, but the uncertainty was quickly replaced by arrogance. He let out another bark of a laugh, this one louder, more dismissive. Go ahead and try, he sneered. I didn't give him another look. I turned, my back straight, and walked toward the heavy glass door. I didn't look back at the 10 men or the man who had just made the biggest mistake of his career. I just walked out, the echo of his laughter following me down the silent, empty hall. It was the sound of a starting gun. 10 years walking out of that glass tower, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a soft hiss. It felt like I was closing the door on another person's life. Blake's mocking laughter was still ringing in my ears, but it was being replaced by the echoes of a decade of memories, a decade of my life poured into the foundation of a company that had just declared me a ghost. I arrived at Argonne Dynamics straight out of MIT, a 26-year-old with a head full of theoretical, physics, and a naive belief in meritocracy. Argonne, then, was a different beast, smaller, hungrier, a place where innovation felt like a collaborative adventure rather than a corporate mandate. Blake Riss was just a senior vice president, his ambitions still cloaked in a convincing layer of mentorship. He recruited me himself, selling me a vision of a company that would change the world, a place where I wouldn't just have a job, but a purpose. We're not a company, Clara, he had told me over a coffee that first week, his eyes bright with what I mistook for sincerity. We're a family, and we believe our family should own a piece of what they build. I believed him. I threw myself into the work, often the last one to leave the lab, the glow of my monitors painting stripes across the floor in the dead of night. My obsession was singular, a self-regenerating energy source, a sensor that could power itself indefinitely by drawing from ambient thermoelectric waste. It was the holy grail of low-power systems. I called it the Aurora Cell, named for the shimmering, self-sustaining energy of the northern lights. For 6 years, the Aurora Cell was my world. It was my child. I conceived it on a whiteboard at 3 o'clock in the morning, fueled by stale coffee and a sudden breakthrough in material science. I nurtured it through thousands of failed simulations, each one teaching me something new. I built the first prototype with my own hands, the delicate soldering work so intricate my fingers ached for days. Every discovery, every schematic, every line of code, and every test result was meticulously documented, and every single file was digitally signed with my personal cryptographic key. It was a habit born of academic discipline, a way of watermarking my intellectual journey. My signature wasn't just my name. It was an unbreakable hash, a time-stamped proof of creation that was more definitive than a fingerprint. I was proud of my work, and I signed it as an artist signs a masterpiece. Blake championed my work relentlessly. He called me his star engineer in board meetings. He secured funding for my research, shielded me from bureaucratic red tape, and repeated his mantra of family and ownership. I trusted him. That trust was the bedrock of my loyalty. It was the reason I turned down offers from larger companies, the reason I committed my most creative years to Argonne. The shift was subtle at first. 3 years ago, Belmont Capital acquired a majority stake in Argonne. The infusion of cash was massive, and with it came a new culture. The casual, collaborative environment was replaced by rigid hierarchies and quarterly growth targets. The language changed. Innovation was no longer about discovery. It was about monetizable assets. Blake, now CEO, changed with it. His suits became sharper, his smile colder. The family rhetoric was replaced with talk of shareholder value. The new directive came down from Belmont through Blake. Argonne was to consolidate and secure full, unencumbered ownership of all internal patents, past and present. That's when the legal department contacted me about the Aurora cell. They sent a standard assignment of invention agreement, a document that would transfer all rights, title, and interest in my creation to Argonne Dynamics LLC. Something felt wrong. This should be done concurrent with the official patent filing, not months before. I told the lead counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, transferring rights to an invention before it's even formally registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office is procedurally incorrect. We file first, establishing the invention's existence and authorship. Then I assign the patent to the company. Marcus had waved his hand dismissively, a gesture of patronizing reassurance. It's just a new internal policy, Clara, a bit of procedural housekeeping to reassure our investors. Standard procedure. It wasn't standard procedure, it was a shortcut, and a legally dubious one. It treated the invention as if it had been born directly from the company itself, erasing the inventor from the equation at the earliest possible stage. I pushed back, insisting we follow the correct, legally sound process. For weeks, there was a quiet standoff. I refused to sign, and they continued to apply gentle, persistent pressure. Then one evening, while working late on the final patent application drafts, I found it. My unease had driven me to do a deep audit of the legal team's shared servers, a place I still had administrative access to from my early days of building the company's data infrastructure. In a folder marked IP Filing Q2, I found two documents, Aurora SL Filing Draft EF and Aurora Filing Draft a Corporate PDF. Their file sizes were identical. Their creation timestamps were 3 minutes apart. My blood ran cold. I opened them side by side. They were identical in every respect. The technical drawings, the abstracts, the detailed claims, except for one small critical section. On the first document, under inventor, was my name, Clara Wade. On the second, the corporate version, that section read, Argonne Dynamics R&D. They were preparing a twin filing. They would file the version, with my name to satisfy legal requirements, but the version they would use internally, the one they would show the board and the investors, would have me completely erased. They were creating a fraudulent paper trail, counting on the fact that no one would ever check the public USPTO database against their internal records. They were counting on me to eventually sign their transfer agreement, which would legally bind me to their version of the truth. I didn't say a word. I copied the first file, the true file, the one with my name and a non-public digital identifier embedded in the metadata that only I could verify, to an encrypted offline drive. I left their fraudulent copy untouched. I let them think I was unaware. The final piece of their arrogance fell into place last year. During a company-wide IP audit, I was instructed to consolidate and purge all redundant draft files related to my projects to streamline our records. It was a transparent attempt to get me to destroy my own evidence. Marcus Thorne stood in my office, watching me as I dragged files to the deletion queue. We just need to make sure the only version on record is the final company-approved patent, he'd said with a thin smile. I played my part. I dragged folders. I clicked confirm, and I gave him a thumb drive with what I told him were the last of the primary drafts. He took it, satisfied. They were so sure of their cleverness. They thought I was just a scientist, a mind for equations and materials, not for corporate treachery. They believed the original electronically signed source file, the one with the unbreakable hash proving I was the author before Belmont Capital was ever in the picture, had been digitally shredded. They thought that piece of paper was gone forever, but it was never a piece of paper. It was a ghost in their machine, a ghost I had created, signed, and hidden away. And as I stepped out of the Argonne Dynamics building for the last time into the noise and the wind of the city, I knew that my ghost was about to come back and haunt them all. Blake Chris had dared me to try. He had no idea I had been preparing for this day for over a year. I didn't storm out and quit that Monday. That would have been emotional. And this was no longer about emotion. This was about logic, strategy. I worked the rest of the week in a state of preternatural calm. I answered emails, I attended meetings, I smiled politely at the men who had watched Blake humiliate me, their eyes now skittering away from mine in the hallways. They thought I had been put back in my box. They thought the storm had passed. They had no idea I was the storm. Friday morning arrived, gray and damp, the sky over the city the color of smudged charcoal. The office was quiet, the week winding down. People were already thinking about the weekend. I was thinking about the rest of my life. At 9:30 a.m., I walked to the high-speed printer at the end of the hall, the one reserved for executive use. The paper was heavier there, the ink sharper. I printed a single page. It was my resignation, effective immediately. The text was brief, professional, and devoid of any feeling. I slid the letter into a crisp white envelope. Alongside it, I placed a small black USB drive. It was unremarkable, the kind of cheap promotional swag companies hand out at trade shows, but on it was a perfectly preserved, cryptographically signed and time-stamped digital copy of the original Aurora Cell patent application, the true application. Walking back to my desk, my heels made soft, rhythmic clicks on the polished concrete. Sarah from marketing was at the coffee station, her expression clouded with concern. "Clara, are you okay?" Things seemed tense in the executive briefing this week. I gave her a small, genuine smile. It felt strange on my face, like using a muscle I hadn't used in a decade. "I've never been clearer, Sarah." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and turned back to her coffee. My exit interview was with a woman named Brenda in Human Resources. Her office was a glass cube decorated with inspirational posters about teamwork and synergy. She had a practiced, sympathetic look on her face. She slid a box of tissues across her desk toward me. I ignored it. "Clara, this is a shock," she began, folding her hands. "Blake was very clear that he values your contributions immensely. He wants you to reconsider. He's prepared to have a conversation about a significant increase in your equity stake." I looked at her, at the empty corporate platitudes sitting on her tongue, and felt nothing but a distant pity. She was a functionary, a messenger. She had no idea what she was in the middle of. "Brenda," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I don't need a stake in something built on theft." Her professional smile faltered. I don't understand." "You don't need to." I pushed the white envelope across the desk. "This is my resignation. I'll need you to sign my copy of the exit paperwork to acknowledge receipt of all materials." She fumbled through her desk for the right forms. Her composure rattled. She filled them out, her pen scratching nervously. There were 2 copies. She signed one and slid it over to me. Before I signed it, I took my own copy of the resignation letter from the envelope and placed it on top of her official form. At the bottom of my letter, I had typed a single additional line, attached, "All original invention documentation as filed under the IP Act." "I just need you to sign here, acknowledging you've received my letter and the attached materials," I said, pointing to a blank space on my copy. Brenda glanced at the line. Her brow furrowed for a second in incomprehension. To her, it was just jargon, a departing employee's strange technical note. It meant nothing. She scribbled her signature, eager to finish the uncomfortable meeting. That signature was her confession. It was Argonne's official acknowledgement that they had received the very evidence that would destroy them. I slid my signed form, now with her signature on it, back into my personal bag. "My personal effects will be shipped to my home address," I said. "Of course," she stammered. Standard procedure. As I walked out of her office, I didn't look back. My journey through the building was a series of final acts, the last walk past the labs where I had spent half my adult life, the last nod to the security guard at the front desk, the last time the building's automatic doors would slide open for me. The moment I was on the sidewalk, the city's noise washing over me, I pulled out my personal phone. I had one last piece of unfinished business. For 10 years, I had maintained the company's primary and backup servers. I had designed the architecture. I knew its every strength and every weakness, and I knew that my own original administrator credentials, created a decade ago, had never been deleted. It was a foolish oversight on their part. I logged into their root server through a secure back-end portal. It took me less than 30 seconds. I navigated to the directories containing every file related to Project Aurora, all my research, all my data, all the schematics, and of course their fraudulent corporate version of the patent. I highlighted it all, every last byte, and then I initiated a secure, multi-pass data wipe. It wasn't just deleting the files. It was overwriting them with random data until they were nothing but digital noise, a process that was completely irreversible. But I did one more thing. I left the server's access logs perfectly intact. The logs would show that their legal team, their executives, and Blake Chris himself had accessed and modified these files repeatedly over the last few months. And then, at 10:47 a.m. on a Friday, they would show that all the files had simply vanished. In the concrete chill of the underground parking garage, I got into my car but didn't start the engine. The air was still and smelled of gasoline and dampness. I took out my personal laptop, the one they had never touched, and powered it on. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark interior of the car. I tethered it to my phone's data connection and opened a browser. I didn't go to a news site or my email. I went to the public access portal for the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I logged in, not as an employee of Argonne Dynamics, but as myself, as an individual inventor. My account was already linked to the pending Aurora Cell application because my name was on it as the author. I navigated to the Manage Ownership and Assignments section. My hands were perfectly steady on the trackpad. My heart was beating a slow, heavy, deliberate rhythm. There it was, patent application 9,458,111B, Aurora Cell, a self-regenerating thermoelectric sensor. Inventor, Clara Wade. Current assignee, Argonne Dynamics, LLC. I clicked Initiate Change of Assignment. A legal notice popped up, a wall of text. I didn't need to read it. I knew it by heart. I scrolled to the bottom. I uploaded a single document, the original signed invention agreement I had kept from my first year at Argonne, the one that predated Belmont, the one that clearly stated all IP was mine until a formal post-filing transfer was mutually executed. Then I checked a box citing Article 6.3 of the Personal Inventors Act, a provision that allows an inventor to reclaim temporary ownership of a pending patent if the assignee has acted in bad faith or failed to execute a formal transfer agreement. I typed my name into the digital signature box and clicked Submit. A small loading icon spun for a few seconds. Then, a confirmation message appeared in plain green text, Request Received, Status Pending Verification. I closed the laptop. I started the car. The engine rumbled to life. It sounded loud in the enclosed space. I pulled out of the parking garage and into the light of a Friday afternoon, joining the stream of traffic leaving the city. I didn't know how long their system would take, an hour, a day. It took 14 minutes. At 3 minutes past 11 o'clock, as I was merging onto the interstate, my phone buzzed with an email notification from the USPTO. I already knew what it said. The Aurora Cell was now officially and legally the sole and exclusive property of Clara Wade. For the first week, there was only silence. A deep, ringing silence that felt more like the intake of breath before a scream than any kind of peace. I knew what was happening inside the Argonne Dynamics tower. I could picture the frantic meetings, the shouting, the dawning, horrified realization as they discovered the empty servers and the updated filing on the USPTO public database. They had walked into a fortress they thought was theirs, only to find the walls gone and the treasury emptied. I imagined Blake's face, contorted with a rage so profound it was probably silent. The silence from their end was a threat, a promise that they were gathering their forces. I waited. The first volley arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 10 days after I had walked out. It wasn't an email or a phone call. It was a letter delivered by a solemn-faced courier. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock, the letterhead belonging to a prestigious, blood-sucking law firm in downtown Chicago. The language inside was a carefully constructed tapestry of legal threats. Words like tortious interference, misappropriation of trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty were scattered like landmines. They accused me of intellectual property infringement and threatened immediate legal action, seeking damages in the hundreds of millions if I attempted to disclose, utilize, or otherwise leverage the company's registered technology. They were threatening to sue me for stealing what was already mine. It was absurd, a desperate bluff from a player holding a dead man's hand. I read the letter twice, not with fear, but with the cold, detached analysis of an engineer examining a flawed schematic. They never mentioned the patent's ownership. They only referred to it as the company's registered technology. This was their tell. They knew they had no claim to its ownership, so they were trying to frighten me into inaction by attacking my right to use it. They didn't know that my original filing, the one that proved my individual authorship before any contract with them was ever in dispute, was sitting on an encrypted drive in my fireproof safe. Their threats were built on a foundation of sand. I didn't reply. I simply scanned the letter and saved it to a folder on my secure drive labeled Correspondence. Then I went about setting up my defenses. I bought a new phone and a new laptop, using them only on public networks. I began recording every phone call, a small legal app that announced the recording at the start of each conversation. The few times someone from Argonne tried to call from a blocked number, they would hang up the second they heard the automated announcement. They wanted no witnesses to their desperation. The quiet war of nerves continued for another week. The pressure was constant but intangible. The sense of being watched was a weight on my shoulders. I'd see the same gray sedan parked down the street from my apartment for hours. I'd feel a pair of eyes on me in a coffee shop and look up to see a man in a nondescript suit quickly look away. They were trying to unnerve me, to make me feel isolated and exposed. They wanted me to make a mistake. The confrontation they wanted came on a Thursday night. I had been working late at a small rented desk in a shared office space, a place that was anonymous and difficult to track. I left around 9:30 p.m., the streets dark and slick with a recent rain. The underground parking garage was mostly empty, the air thick and cold. As I pulled my car onto the street, I saw it in my rearview mirror, a dark, late-model sedan with no-name hubcaps pulling out 2 floors below me. It fell in line 3 cars back. I drove normally for 10 blocks, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. It stayed there. I took a right onto a quieter side street. It took the same right. I made a series of unnecessary turns, weaving a meaningless path through the city's grid. It mirrored every move, a silent, predatory shadow. There was no question anymore. I was being followed. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind worked like a processor, running through scenarios and calculating outcomes. Driving home was out of the question. I wouldn't lead them there. Confronting them was foolish. There was only one logical move. I checked my mirror one last time. The sedan was closer now, more confident. I waited until the next green light, then smoothly signaled a right turn. The sign was large, blue, and illuminated by floodlights, Chicago Police Department, 18th District. I turned into the public parking area, a space bathed in the kind of harsh, unforgiving light that leaves no room for shadows. I pulled into a spot directly in front of the main entrance, where a uniformed officer stood talking on his radio. I put the car in park but left the engine running. In my rearview mirror, I watched the dark sedan falter. It slowed to a crawl at the entrance of the parking lot, its driver suddenly faced with a choice he hadn't anticipated. For a long moment, the car just sat there, caught between the darkness of the street and the bright, sterile safety of the police station. I could feel their panic from 50 feet away. Then, with a squeal of tires, the car accelerated, speeding past the entrance and disappearing into the night. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, my engine humming, the adrenaline finally starting to recede. I had won that little battle. I had shown them I wouldn't be easily intimidated. The very next morning, at 8:15 a.m., a new email appeared in my inbox. It was from Marcus Thorne, the same lawyer who had signed the threatening letter. The tone, however, was entirely different. The legalistic jargon was gone. The threats had vanished. It was 3 sentences long, Ms. Wade. It has become clear that there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding the intellectual property of Project Aurora. We believe it is in all parties' best interest to find an amicable path forward. Please let us know when you would be available to negotiate a resolution. I read the email, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Their attempt at intimidation had failed so spectacularly that they had been forced to abandon the pretense of power. They were asking to negotiate. They were admitting they had nothing. I let them wait for 4 hours. Then I replied. My response was even shorter than theirs. I am willing to negotiate, but not at a table with Mr. Hriss. I hit send. I had dictated my first term. I was in control. Now it was time to make my own move. They thought they were the only ones who could play this game. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a deep dive. Not into my own data, but into theirs. I researched Argonne's biggest competitor, Everline Technologies. I analyzed their product lines, their recent acquisitions, their stated goals for the next 5 years. They were aggressive, innovative, and most importantly, they were desperate to break Argonne's hold on the energy sector. I found the name of their chief strategy officer, a woman named Marin Dorsey. I didn't email a general inquiries address. I found her direct email through a professional network database. My message to her was carefully crafted, a baited hook cast into the deep. The subject line was simple, confidential inquiry, uncommercialized energy platform. The body of the email was concise, Miss Dorsey. My name is Clara Wade. I am the principal inventor of a new self-sustaining energy cell technology with proven revolutionary potential. Due to a change in circumstances, this technology is now an independent asset free of any corporate entanglement. I believe it aligns perfectly with Everline's strategic objectives. I would be available to provide a confidential briefing at your earliest convenience. I attached nothing. I offered no proof. I simply presented an opportunity. The response came in less than an hour. It was from her executive assistant, Miss Wade. Miss Dorsey can make time to meet with you tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. Please let us know if this is suitable. An NDA will be forwarded for your review. I closed my laptop. The pieces were moving. The silence was broken. The real war was about to begin. The Everline Technologies building was a blade of glass and steel that seemed to slice the sky in half. Unlike Argonne's dark, imposing tower, this one felt light, almost transparent. The lobby was a symphony of white marble and soft, recessed lighting. There was no sense of oppressive corporate weight here. There was only the quiet, humming confidence of new money and relentless ambition. I was escorted to the 42nd floor. The elevator ride was silent and swift, my ears popping as we ascended. The boardroom at the top was less a room and more a vantage point. 3 of its walls were floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dizzying panoramic view of the city sprawling below. Argonne's tower was visible in the distance, a squat, dark block against the horizon. It looked smaller from up here. Marin Dorsey did not look like a CEO. She wore a simple, dark gray dress, no jewelry except for a plain watch. Her hair was cut short, and her eyes were a startlingly bright blue. They were the eyes of an analyst, someone who missed nothing. She wasn't flanked by a team of lawyers or executives. It was just her, me, and a single silent man who introduced himself as her head of legal, then sat in a corner and said nothing more. "Miss Wade," Marin began, her voice calm and direct. She gestured to the chair opposite her at a small round table, not a massive boardroom monolith. "Thank you for coming. Your email was intriguing. Please tell me about this technology." There was no small talk. I appreciated that. I opened my laptop and projected a single, elegant, 3-dimensional model onto the wall screen. It was the Aurora cell. "This is a fully autonomous, self-regenerating thermoelectric sensor," I began, my voice as steady as my hands. "It draws power from ambient temperature differentials as low as 2 degrees. It requires no battery, no external power source. It runs indefinitely. Its applications range from next-generation IoT devices to permanent off-grid monitoring systems for critical infrastructure. It makes planned obsolescence in low-power devices obsolete." I walked her through the core science, the material physics, the years of research condensed into a 10-minute data-rich presentation. I didn't embellish. The technology didn't need it. Marin listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on the screen, her mind clearly processing not just what the technology was, but what it could do to the market, what it could do to Argonne. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "The science is remarkable," she said, her analytical eyes finally turning to me, "but remarkable science gets tied up in court for years. What makes you think this asset is truly, as you put it, free of any corporate entanglement?" This was the moment. I closed the presentation and brought up a different file. It was a simple text-based screen, but it held more power than any 3-dimensional model. Because I filed the initial patent application as an individual inventor on March 12th, 2 years ago, at exactly 10:32 a.m., I said. I pointed to a line on the screen. "This is the official timestamp from the USPTO filing receipt, and this," I pointed to a long alphanumeric string, "is the SHA-256 cryptographic hash of the original filing document. It's a digital fingerprint, unbreakable and impossible to counterfeit. It proves that the document submitted at that exact time is the one I have in my possession." I let her and her lawyer absorb the information. I was showing them an unbreakable chain of custody. I had established beyond any doubt that I was the legal and chronological originator of the invention. Marin leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "A filing is one thing. You worked at Argonne for a decade. They will claim you did so under a work-for-hire agreement, that anything you created on their time with their resources belongs to them." "They will," I agreed, "and that is the argument they will take to court." Which brings me to the crux of the situation. I navigated to a new folder, one containing 2 PDF files side by side, Aurora Filing Saws Draft V11 ADF and Aurora Filing Draft V11 Corporate PDF. Argonne's legal department, under the direction of Blake H. Riss, prepared 2 versions of the patent application. This one, I motioned to the first, lists me as the inventor. The second one, created 3 minutes later, lists the inventor as Argon Dynamics R&D. It is an act of fraud. They intended to file the legitimate version to satisfy the patent office while using the fraudulent version for all internal and investor-facing records. I then brought up my employment contract. My contract stipulated that a formal, mutually signed assignment of invention agreement must be executed after a patent is filed for the rights to transfer to the company. They pressured me to sign a premature assignment, which I refused. They have no such signed document. Marin's lawyer, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. So they have no paper trail to prove ownership transfer, and you have a paper trail that proves they intended to commit fraud by erasing you from the record. Precisely, I said. Marin leaned back in her chair, a slow, thoughtful expression on her face. She looked out the window at the distant Argonne Tower. So, if we were to acquire the commercial rights to this technology, what would Argonne's reaction be? I met her gaze without blinking. They will sue, and they will lose. They will lose publicly, and they will lose badly in the discovery process. This evidence of their fraudulent filing will become public record. It won't just cost them the patent. It will cost them their reputation. It will trigger shareholder lawsuits and a federal investigation. A lawsuit isn't your risk, Ms. Dorsey. It's my leverage. For the first time since I had walked into the room, Marin Dorsey smiled. It was a small, sharp, predatory thing. A shark smile. We're not going to buy your technology, Ms. Wade, she said softly. My heart skipped a beat, a flicker of cold uncertainty. We are going to buy something much more valuable, she continued, her blue eyes glittering. We are going to buy the exclusive worldwide perpetual license to commercialize the Aurora cell. You will retain ownership of the patent. You will be our partner, and we, in turn, will be the sole gatekeeper of your invention. I saw the strategic brilliance immediately. If they bought it outright, it was a simple asset acquisition. By licensing it, they were weaponizing it. They weren't just gaining a technology. They were gaining control over Argonne's future. I find that arrangement agreeable, I said, my mind already racing ahead to the next move, with one condition. Marin raised an eyebrow. Go on. I want a clause in the agreement. We can call it a royalty reversal clause. Argonne is already attempting to integrate the foundational principles of the Aurora cell into their new product line. When they lose the lawsuit, they will be forced to license the technology from us to avoid scrapping their entire R&D pipeline. The clause will state that for any license granted to Argonne Dynamics or any of its subsidiaries, 30% of all licensing fees and royalties paid to Everline will be passed directly to me on top of my own partnership compensation. I paused. I want them to know that every time they sell a product based on my work, they are not only paying their biggest competitor, but they are paying me personally for the privilege of doing so. The lawyer in the corner almost imperceptibly shook his head, likely at the sheer audacity of the demand, but Marin's smile widened. She understood. This wasn't just about money, it was about punishment. It was a poison pill that would make every dollar of profit Argon made from my invention taste like ash. You'll get your clause, she said. We'll have the agreement drawn up immediately. It took them less than an hour. A team of their lawyers appeared. Documents materialized, and I read every word. My own legal counsel on a video call on my laptop, reviewing it in real time. It was all there, an 8-figure signing bonus, a significant percentage of all future profits, and my royalty reversal clause worded in airtight legalese. At 4:45 p.m., with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city, I picked up a pen and signed my name. Marin signed after me. Her signature was a clean, decisive slash. As I was putting the cap back on the pen, Marin nodded to her assistant. Do it now. I looked at her, confused. One moment, she said, her eyes on my laptop screen, which was still open to the USPTO public portal. I watched, fascinated, as the page refreshed itself. The status line for patent application, 945,811B, which had read assignee, Clara Wade, flickered, and then new text appeared, sharp and black and brutally final exclusive licensing rights assigned to Everline Technologies in perpetuity by inventor Clara Wade. The deal wasn't just signed on paper. It had been executed in real time on the global stage. It was done, irrevocable. The trap was set. Marin Dorsey and Everline did not wait. They moved with the silent, brutal efficiency of a shark. For a week, I heard nothing. I stayed in my small apartment, working, preparing, and watching the market. I knew Argonne was in a state of controlled panic, tearing their systems apart to understand what I had done. But they couldn't make a public move without admitting a catastrophic failure. They were trapped, and they knew it. The explosion came a week to the day after I signed the Everline agreement. It wasn't a press release, it was a front-page story in the Wall Street Journal's technology section. The headline was a cannon shot. Everline Technologies unveils Aurora Cell, a revolutionary self-sustaining power source poised to upend energy sector. The article was thorough, quoting anonymous industry experts who hailed the technology as a decade-level breakthrough, and it contained one beautifully placed line. Everline confirmed it has secured the exclusive worldwide license to the technology from its inventor, Clara Wade, formerly of Argonne Dynamics. I didn't have to imagine the reaction inside the Argonne Tower. I could almost feel the seismic shock wave from across the city. Later, a source still loyal to me inside the company would describe the scene. The news alert had flashed across every terminal in the building at 9:03 a.m. A stunned silence had fallen over the trading floor and the executive wing. That silence was shattered by a roar from Blake Chris's office, followed by the distinct sound of a porcelain coffee cup exploding against a wall. He had burst out of his office, his face a mask of purple fury, and screamed at Marcus Thorne to fix this now. Fixing it was a frantic, desperate scramble. Within hours, Argonne's lawyers filed an emergency petition with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It was a public declaration of war, a document filled with accusations of theft, breach of contract, and malicious interference. Their core argument was that I, Clara Wade, had acted in a rogue capacity outside the authority of my employment to illegally transfer an asset belonging wholly and completely to Argonne Dynamics. They were painting me as a common thief. It was a fatal mistake. By filing the petition, they had triggered a formal, binding legal process. They had just invited me onto a battlefield of their choosing, not realizing I had already mined the entire field. The preliminary hearing was scheduled with unusual speed, a testament to the 9-figure valuation hanging in the balance. It took place in a sterile, wood-paneled hearing room at the USPTO headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and nervous tension. Blake was there, sitting beside Marcus Thorne and a team of 3 other lawyers from their high-priced firm. He looked confident, restored to his usual state of smug superiority. He was on his home turf, a place of power and procedure, and he shot me a look of pure, dismissive contempt from across the room. He saw a lone woman, a former employee he had already crushed. He was wrong. I was not alone. Sitting beside me was Julian Croft. Croft was a legend in intellectual property law, a quiet, unassuming man in his late 60s whose gentle demeanor concealed a mind like a steel trap. He was the lawyer Everline kept on retainer for their most critical battles, the man who had famously led the legal team that won a landmark patent case against Apple 5 years prior. His presence in the room was a quiet statement of intent from Marin Dorsey. The moment the Argonne legal team saw him, a visible flicker of panic passed through their ranks. Blake's smug expression tightened. This was not the simple proceeding he had anticipated. Argonne's counsel went first, laying out a dramatic narrative of my betrayal. They spoke of the company's generous investment in my research, of the trust placed in me, and of my calculated theft of their most valuable asset. It was a compelling story, if you didn't know any of the facts. When he finished, one of the 3 patent examiners, a stern-looking woman at the center of the panel, turned to my side. "Mr. Croft, your response?" Julian Croft stood up slowly. "Thank you, Madam Examiner. We believe the facts of this matter are quite simple and require no dramatic narrative. My colleague, Miss Wade, will present them." All eyes turned to me. I stood and walked to the podium, placing my laptop on it and connecting it to the room's main display. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, including Blake's, burning with hatred. I ignored them all. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and clear. "The petitioner, Argonne Dynamics, claims that the Aurora Cell is their asset. Their entire case rests on the standard work-for-hire doctrine within my employment agreement. I would like to direct your attention to that very agreement." On the screen, I displayed a scanned copy of the contract I had signed 10 years ago. I highlighted a single section, Section 7.2. I read aloud, "Inventor agrees that any and all inventions created during their employment will be assigned to the company. Said assignment shall be executed via a formal, written, and mutually signed assignment of invention agreement following the official filing of a patent application with the USPTO." I turned from the screen to the examiners, then let my gaze settle on Marcus Thorne. Argonne's petition to you claims they are the owners of this invention. Therefore, I would like to ask Mr. Thorne, as legal representative for the petitioner, to please produce the signed assignment of invention agreement for the Aurora cell as stipulated by their own contract. A heavy silence descended on the room. Marcus Thorne shuffled his papers, his face turning a blotchy red. He cleared his throat. The execution of that document was a pending formality. So you do not have it? I asked simply. It was understood, he began. Yes or no, Mr. Thorne? Do you have a signed transfer agreement? Julian Croft's voice cut in, sharp and precise. Thorne looked at Blake, who gave an infinitesimal shake of his head. No, Thorne finally mumbled. We do not. A murmur went through the room. I had just dismantled the entire foundation of their case. They had no legal document proving I had ever transferred ownership of my invention to them. Thank you, I said. That clarifies the contractual situation. Now, let's clarify the invention's authorship. I placed a small black USB drive on the podium, the same one I had placed in my resignation envelope. This is Exhibit B. It is a complete, unedited copy of the access logs from Argonne's own internal servers pertaining to all files associated with Project Aurora. The logs were copied on the day of my resignation, and their integrity is cryptographically verifiable. I clicked a file, and the screen filled with lines of code and text. I highlighted a specific series of entries. These logs show all access and modification events for the patent application drafts. As you can see, the final author-approved version was saved and locked by me at 5:22 p.m. on March 11th. But then, if you look at these entries from March 12th at 2:17 in the morning, you will see a new file was created, the corporate version. The logs show the user ID that created and saved this fraudulent document. I zoomed in on the user ID, the text filling the giant screen. Stark and undeniable, BHRS. A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to make an accusation. It was another to show digital proof that the CEO himself had created a fraudulent document in the dead of night. Blake shot to his feet. This is fabricated. She wiped the servers. This is... Sit down, Mr. Hriss, the lead examiner commanded, her voice like ice. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I didn't wipe the logs, Mr. Hriss. I only wiped the data you were trying to steal. Julian Croft stood once more. He didn't need to show any more evidence. He simply delivered the final, elegant summary, citing legal precedents that affirmed the inalienable rights of an inventor prior to a formal assignment and the severe legal consequences of filing fraudulent documents with a federal agency. His voice was a calm, steady scalpel, cutting away the last vestiges of Argonne's case until there was nothing left. The examiners conferred for less than 10 minutes. When the lead examiner looked up, her face was grim. She adjusted her microphone. After reviewing the evidence presented, she began, her voice amplified throughout the silent room. This panel finds the following: the original, legally recognized patent application for the technology known as the Aurora cell was filed by and belongs to the inventor of record, Miss Clara Wade. She looked directly at the Argonne legal team. We also find compelling evidence that a subsequent modified document was created with the intent to misrepresent the invention's authorship. Therefore, Argonne Dynamics' emergency petition is denied. The original filing record stands. Any and all modifications made after the date of the original filing are invalid. It was over. The words hung in the air, absolute and final. I slowly turned my head and looked at Blake Hriss. The arrogant smirk was gone. The confident posture had collapsed. He was slumped in his chair, his face the color of ash, his mouth slightly agape in stunned disbelief. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire empire burn to the ground, live and in high definition, and in that moment, all he could do was stare at me, the ghost who had just checkmated the king in the middle of his own court. The ruling in Alexandria was not the end of the war, it was the beginning of the rout. The verdict from the patent office was a clean, precise demolition charge that fractured the foundations of Argonne Dynamics. The collapse was not immediate. It was a slow, agonizing crumbling, and I had a front row seat. I watched it happen from a small, anonymous coffee shop 2 cities away, a place with good Wi-Fi and a view of a quiet, tree-lined street. For me, the world had become calm. For them, it had become a vortex of noise. The first tremors hit the financial markets the morning after the hearing. Argonne stock, symbol ARG, opened with a 15% drop, a red bleeding gash on the ticker screen. Financial news outlets, which had been tracking the Everline announcement, now had the bloody sequel to their story. Headlines popped up on my newsfeed, stark and brutal. Argonne Dynamics Aurora future extinguished in patent ruling, inventor claims fraud, USPTO sides with Everline licensee, ARG plummets as investors question leadership integrity. By the end of the second day, the stock had stabilized, but only after a catastrophic 18% loss in value, wiping out nearly $1 billion of market capitalization. My source inside the company described the atmosphere as a waking nightmare. The investor relations phone lines were in a state of perpetual meltdown. Emergency board meetings were convened only to dissolve hours later with no resolution. The hallways, normally buzzing with productive energy, were now filled with hushed, panicked whispers and the grim, downcast faces of employees who could see the iceberg dead ahead. The panic reached its most pathetic crescendo with an internal directive issued by HR. Blake, in a fit of impotent rage, had apparently ordered them to expunge her from the system. They were to delete my employee files, scrub my name from old project reports, and remove my photo from archived company newsletters. It was a desperate attempt to rewrite history, to pretend I had never existed. But they, like Blake, had forgotten who had built their house. I had designed their data retention and legal archive system 6 years ago. I had made it immutable on purpose to comply with federal regulations. Every document legally required for discovery, every email, every digitally signed report was stored on a write-once server. It could not be altered. It could not be deleted. Their frantic attempts to erase me were not only failing, but they were also creating a new, damning log of evidence, a time-stamped record of a corporate-wide attempt to destroy evidence. While they were busy trying to erase the past, Everline was methodically dismantling their future. On Wednesday afternoon, a cease-and-desist letter from Julian Croft's office was delivered to Argonne's headquarters. It was a surgical strike. The letter detailed with chilling precision every single component currently in production at Argonne's manufacturing facilities that was based on the foundational principles of the Aurora cell. It demanded an immediate halt to the production and use of these components, citing Everline's exclusive license to the patent. The effect was immediate. Assembly lines in their factories in Ohio and Texas ground to a halt. Multi-million-dollar supply chain orders were canceled. Argonne was legally barred from manufacturing the very products Blake had, just weeks earlier, promised would be their salvation. They were trapped, forced to stop using a technology they desperately needed, all because they had tried to steal it. That evening, my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I never thought I would see again, Blake Chris. I let it ring 4 times, then answered, enabling the recording notification as I did. I said nothing. For a long moment, there was only the sound of his ragged breathing on the other end. The arrogant, booming voice I remembered from the boardroom was gone. The furious roar my source had described was gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out shell. "Clara," he said, his voice a dry rasp. We can fix this. There's a deal to be made here, a private agreement. He was offering me a bribe, hush money. After he had failed to crush me in a public forum, the sheer pathetic arrogance of it was almost breathtaking. He still thought this was a negotiation he could win, that my integrity had a price tag he could afford. "There is no us anymore, Blake," I said, my voice as cold and empty as the space between stars. Don't be like this," he stammered, the desperation clawing its way into his voice. "I can make you a very wealthy woman. You already had your chance to do that when you could have simply been an honest man," I replied. Then I hung up. I blocked his number and went back to drinking my tea. The narrative in the public sphere was taking on a life of its own. The tech journals, hungry for a David and Goliath story, had found their hero. They didn't have any quotes from me. I refused all interview requests, so they built a persona for me out of the facts. One influential blog dubbed me the quiet engineer, and the name stuck. They painted a picture of a reclusive, brilliant inventor who had worked silently for a decade, only to be betrayed and forced to defend her life's work. The narrative was powerful because it was true. Then the leaks began. The carefully managed corporate wall of silence at Argonne, already fractured, finally shattered. The first was a video clearly shot on a cell phone from a cracked-open office door. It was shaky, the audio distorted, but it was unmistakably Blake Riss. He was on the phone, his back to the camera, his entire body rigid with fury. "She's ruined me," he screamed into the receiver, his voice cracking. "The company, everything, that quiet little, she's burned it all to the ground." The video went viral in hours. It was the lead story on tech news sites, played on a loop on financial news channels. The CEO of a major tech corporation having a complete unfiltered meltdown. It was blood in the water. The second leak was, in its own way, even more damaging. It was an internal email from Vera, Argonne's COO, to the rest of the executive board. The subject line was Aurora Cell, Final Assessment. The email was a cold, pragmatic admission of utter defeat. It read, "Following the ruling and our subsequent legal analysis, the company's position is untenable. We have no rights to the Aurora Cell patent. We have no legal path to reclaim them. Our continued attempts to do so will only incur further financial and reputational damage. We need to consider this asset permanently lost and pivot our strategy accordingly." If Blake's video was the emotional heart of the scandal, Vera's email was the clinical autopsy report. It was the company's own leadership admitting, in stark black and white terms, that they had lost, that it was over. That was when the hashtag started. I saw it first on a tech forum, then it migrated to social media, #PatentRevenge. It was trending within an hour, it became a global conversation. Engineers, scientists, and creatives from every industry began sharing their own stories of having their work stolen by employers. My story had become a symbol of a silent, long-simmering battle that happened every day in cubicles and labs around the world. Memes appeared, using the image of Blake's face from the hearing, his mouth agape in shock. My name was everywhere, not as a thief, but as a quiet revolutionary. I sat there in the coffee shop, the world screaming on my laptop screen. The stock ticker showed ARG in another free fall. News alerts flashed with updates on the leaked video. My email inbox was a flood of messages from reporters, lawyers, and even other inventors. But in my small corner of the world, there was only the gentle hiss of the espresso machine, the soft murmur of conversations at other tables, and the rich, dark aroma of coffee. I scrolled through the chaos, an observer watching a distant fire burn. I took a slow sip from my cup. It was hot and strong, and for the first time in a very long time, it tasted like victory. The call came at 9:34 in the morning. I was in the kitchen of my new apartment, a minimalist space with white walls and a large window that looked out over a quiet park. The morning sun streamed in, catching the steam rising from my cup of tea. It was a scene of profound peace, a stark contrast to the inferno I had ignited in the corporate world. I had blocked Blake's personal number, but he was calling from a new one, a burner phone most likely. I knew it was him before I even answered. No one else would be this desperate. I let it ring 3 times, a small act of control. Then I answered, activating the recording app out of habit. I said nothing. I just listened to the sound of his world ending. His breathing was the first thing I heard. It was shallow, ragged, the sound of a man who had been running for a mile. There was a faint tremor in it. When he finally spoke my name, it was a broken thing, a shard of his former arrogance. Clara. I remained silent. I let him sit in the void he had created. Let him be the one to fill it. Please, he began, and the word was so stripped of its usual power, so raw and pleading, that it was almost unrecognizable coming from him. Just give it back, the patent. We can unwind this. I'll compensate you. I'll give you anything you want. Anything you want. The words of a king who has lost his kingdom, offering worthless deeds to the conqueror. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about money. He thought this was a transaction. I finally spoke. My voice was low, and I made sure it was completely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a machine stating a fact. You once told me, in front of 10 of your executives, that if I thought I was that good, I should leave and do it myself. There was a sharp intake of breath on his end. He remembered the public execution. The moment he had handed me the sword. That was a mistake, Clara, a misunderstanding. I was under a lot of pressure. It was the clearest thing you've ever said to me, I replied. I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth spread through my chest, a grounding sensation. In the midst of this final cold confrontation, he changed tactics. The pleading vanished, replaced by a desperate attempt at reason, the false collegiality of a man who knows he has no power but pretends they are equals. Look, you've won. Okay, you've made your point. You've beaten me. But this scorched earth approach, it doesn't help anyone. We can both still come out of this with a win, a mutual benefit. Mutual benefit, the language of the boardroom, so hollow and meaningless now. He was still trying to pull me back into his world, a world where justice was just another line item in a negotiation. I don't need a mutual benefit, Blake, I said, setting my cup down with a soft click on the stone countertop. I need what is fair. Fair, He almost choked on the word, as if its very concept was alien to him. What's fair? You want money, is that it? Fine. Name your price. Tell me how much is enough. The question hung in the air. How much is enough? He was asking me to put a price on 10 years of my life, on my loyalty, on the public humiliation, on the sleepless nights and the stolen legacy. He thought he could write a check and make it all go away. He was, as always, wrong. But I would give him a number. I would give him his number. $450 million, I said. My voice didn't waver. It was as calm as if I were ordering groceries. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a silence filled with the screeching, grinding halt of his entire reality. He had been expecting me to say 5 million, 10, maybe a number he could counter, a number he could understand. But I had given him the one number he couldn't argue with. That's the valuation you put on the Aurora cell, I continued into the void, twisting the knife. That's the number you reported to the board of directors when you were preparing to launch it as Argonne's flagship technology. It was your number, Blake, not mine. You told your shareholders my work was worth just under $500 million. I'm simply agreeing with your assessment. He finally found his voice, but it was strangled, broken, a dry, rasping sound that was part laugh, part sob. That's impossible. Clara, the company doesn't have that kind of cash. We can't. He was telling the truth. After the stock crash, after the canceled contracts, after the legal fees, they were bleeding. A payment like that wouldn't just be difficult. It would be an extinction-level event. It would bankrupt them. I know, I said. The 2 words were the coldest I had ever spoken. They were the sound of a coffin lid closing. I know it's impossible. I let him process that. I let him understand that my demand wasn't a starting point for a negotiation. It was a sentence. Then why? He whispered, his voice cracking completely. Why say it? So that you would understand, I said softly, that there was never a deal to be made here. Not with you. This was never for sale. I paused, letting the final blow gather its weight. Because I've already signed the licensing agreement for that exact technology. I signed it with your biggest competitor. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to hear him scream or beg or break down. My part in his story was over. I pressed the red icon on my phone screen. The call ended, and all that was left was a long, cold, and utterly final dial tone. The silence that followed the phone call was heavier than any sound. I had severed the last connection to my old life, and in the quiet that remained, the world began to react. My laptop, sitting open on the counter, became my window to the collapse. The news came in a torrent, a relentless 24-hour cycle of consequences. Before the markets even opened the next day, the first domino fell. A press release from a major German automotive conglomerate announced they were terminating their strategic supply agreement with Argonne Dynamics effective immediately, citing a sudden and catastrophic loss of confidence in Argonne's future technology pipeline. They had been Argonne's largest client. Before noon, 2 more followed, a defense contractor and a consumer electronics giant. 3 of their most vital long-term contracts erased in the space of a morning. It was a corporate death sentence delivered by 1,000 cuts. The final, fatal blow was delivered by Everline Technologies at precisely 1 p.m. It was a formal press announcement sent out over every major newswire. It was a masterpiece of corporate aggression cloaked in the language of triumph. Everline announced they had signed a 10-year exclusive global licensing agreement for the Aurora cell technology. And in the second paragraph, they stated the official valuation they had placed on the technology for the purposes of the deal, $450 million. They used my number. Marin Dorsey was not just signing a deal, she was sending a message. The number I had used as a sentence, she was now using as a banner. It was the value of the kingdom Blake had lost, now publicly owned by his greatest rival. The market, which had been hemorrhaging, went into a final, convulsive freefall. Trading on ARG was halted twice to prevent a complete wipeout. The internal pressure at Argonne must have been unimaginable. The board of directors, led by the investors from Belmont Capital, convened an emergency meeting that afternoon. It lasted for 6 hours. There were no press statements, but the outcome was leaked to the financial press before the meeting was even officially adjourned. Blake Riss had been forced to resign from the board and his position as CEO effective immediately. He wasn't just fired. He was publicly exiled, a king dethroned by his own panicked court. The next morning, the Wall Street Journal ran the story that would define the entire affair. The headline was stark, brutal, and perfectly accurate. How One Fired Engineer Cost Argon Dynamics Its Core Technology. The article was a detailed, meticulously researched timeline of my decade at the company, the development of the Aurora cell, the public humiliation in the boardroom, the patent dispute, and the final stunning collapse. It cemented the narrative. I was the quiet, wronged inventor. Blake was the arrogant, foolish CEO whose hubris had single-handedly destroyed his own company. That evening, as I was making dinner in my quiet apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. There were only 3 words. Are you proud? I stared at the message for a long time. The question was a small poison dart. It was meant to frame my actions as an act of ego, of destructive pride. I could imagine who sent it. Blake using another burner phone, or Marcus Thorne, or one of the 10 silent men from that final meeting trying to assuage their own guilt by painting me as the villain. They wanted me to feel like I had destroyed something. They still didn't understand that I had only reclaimed what was mine. My reply was just as short, no, I'm free. I sent the message and then blocked the number. I felt no anger, no need to justify myself. I felt only the simple, profound truth of my own words. I took my plate to the large window overlooking the city. Night had fallen, and the world below was a glittering tapestry of light and motion. The endless streams of headlights, the glowing neon signs, the warm square lights of a million other windows, a million other lives. The reflection of my own face was a faint ghost against the glass, my expression calm, unreadable. For 10 years I had looked at this city from the 40th floor of the Argonne Tower, a place of chilled air and immense pressure. Now I was looking at it from my own space, a place of warmth and quiet. I was no longer above it all. I was a part of it, anonymous and untethered. A few weeks later, Everline held their annual product launch event. I watched the live stream on my laptop, just another anonymous viewer among thousands. Marin Dorsey took the stage, confident and poised. She spoke about the future, about a new era of sustainable, permanent technology. Today, Everline is proud to introduce a new paradigm in personal electronics, she announced, her voice ringing with excitement. Behind her, a massive screen lit up with an image of a sleek, beautiful new device, and beneath it, the tagline that would soon be on billboards and commercials around the world, powered by Aurora. My name was not on the screen. It was not mentioned in the press conference. It was not on the product itself. And as I watched the applause, I felt a profound and surprising sense of peace. My victory wasn't my name in lights. It was the technology itself, living and breathing out in the world, free from the man who had tried to cage it, to steal it, to call it his own. The world would run on my work. The truth of its origin was a quiet current running beneath the surface of things. I knew, and Marin Dorsey knew, and Blake Chris, wherever he was, knew, and that was enough. I did not attend the Everline product launch in person. I watched it from the quiet solitude of my apartment, a spectator to my own vindication. But for this, the official press conference announcing the first commercial partnership for the Aurora cell, Marin Dorsey had insisted. The final move on the board is yours to make, Clara, she had told me over the phone. You started this. You should be there to see it end. So I came. I wasn't on stage, not at first. I sat in a reserved seat in the front row of the cavernous Art Deco auditorium Everline had rented for the occasion. The air buzzed with the energy of hundreds of tech journalists, industry analysts, and investors. The lights were low, the stage, a pool of brilliant white, dominated by a screen the size of a small building. I felt strangely calm, a quiet island in a sea of anticipation. I was here not as a participant, but as a witness. Marin Dorsey commanded the stage with an easy, understated authority. She spoke of the future of a world untethered by batteries and charging cables. She was selling not just a product, but a paradigm shift. And then she began to talk about the origin of the technology. It was at that moment that I saw him. He slipped in through a side door at the very back of the auditorium, a ghost at the feast, Blake Chris. He was a man utterly transformed. The impeccable suit was rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. His hair, once perfectly styled, was a mess. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out, scanning the room with a desperate, hunted look. He wasn't the titan of industry I remembered. He was a wraith, a man haunted by his own colossal failure, drawn inexplicably back to the scene of his final public execution. He found an empty seat in the last row, a shadow in the cheap seats, and folded into himself, hoping to be invisible. But I saw him from my seat in the front row. I felt his presence like a drop in barometric pressure. On stage, Marin was reaching her crescendo. Innovation is not born in a boardroom, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. It is born in the mind of a single person. It is the product of passion, of dedication, and of a vision that others cannot yet see. Everline is proud to be the steward of such a vision. She paused, and the massive screen behind her, which had been showing abstract graphics of energy flows, went black. The auditorium held its breath. The technology that will power the next generation of our world, Marin continued, her voice dropping to a dramatic hush, is the Aurora Cell. The words appeared on the screen in clean white letters, and then another line of text faded in beneath it, larger, more prominent, a statement of undeniable truth, a vision by Clara Wade. For a second, there was absolute silence, a collective, stunned intake of breath. Then, a single person in the audience began to clap. Another joined, and then the entire auditorium erupted. It wasn't polite corporate applause. It was a roar, a standing ovation from the hardest, most cynical audience in the world, a spontaneous acknowledgement, not just of the technology, but of the story they all now knew. I watched Blake from across the vast, dark expanse of the room. I could see his face illuminated by the stark white light from the screen. He was frozen, his head tilted up, his expression one of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. The name on the screen, my name, was a judgment, a final public branding that marked the true author of his downfall. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that seemed to press him down into his seat, to crush him. His face was a mask of pale, waxy horror. The applause went on for what felt like an eternity. Marin let it wash over the room before raising a hand. As the sound subsided, the MC for the event stepped to the podium. And now, the MC announced, his voice booming, we are honored to have the visionary herself with us today. Please welcome to the stage Ms. Clara Wade. A spotlight found me, blinding me for a second. The applause thundered back to life. I hadn't expected this. This was Marin's final move. This wasn't just about the technology. It was about the story. I stood up, my legs steady, and walked the few steps onto the stage. I shook Marin's hand, and she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledgement, respect. I turned to the podium. The light was intensely hot. The faces of the audience were a blur, a sea of indistinct shapes in the darkness. But I knew that somewhere in the back, in the last row, one face was watching me with burning, hollow eyes. I could feel his gaze like a physical touch. The MC leaned toward me. Miss Wade, he said, his voice filled with theatrical reverence, after everything you've been through, after this incredible journey, do you have any words you'd like to share with us? I leaned into the microphone. The entire room was silent, waiting. I could have said 1,000 things. I could have thanked Marin. I could have spoken about the technology. I could have delivered a soaring speech about integrity and justice. But I only had one thing to say, one final message, aimed not at the hundreds of faces in front of me, but at the one shadow cowering in the back. My voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the silent hall. It was crisp, cold, and final, just one. I paused, letting the two words hang in the air. Never dare someone to leave when you don't know what they're taking with them. The silence was shattered by an explosion of light. 100 flashbulbs went off at once, a volley of silent lightning that bleached the entire world white for a second. In that single, brilliant flash, I saw Blake's face one last time, frozen in a rictus of perfect, uncomprehending despair. I didn't wait for the applause. I simply turned my back on the audience, on the lights, on the stage, and walked away. I didn't look at Marin. I didn't look at the MC. I walked toward the back of the stage, toward a private exit. I pushed open a heavy glass door and stepped out into the cool, quiet air of a backstage corridor. The roar of the crowd was instantly muffled, a distant, muted thunder. The door swung shut behind me, its pneumatic hiss the sound of a final, clean separation. The glass of the door was a perfect mirror. In it, I could see my own reflection, a solitary figure in a quiet hallway. And beyond my reflection, through the glass, I could see the distant, dark shape of the Argonne Dynamics Tower, a tombstone against the afternoon sky. This time, I was on the outside looking at it, and I was at last completely and utterly free. Thank you for listening to my story.